What's up, golf friends? This is Jim Colton, and this is the Driven Golf Podcast. We've got the three-man weave going. We're back. We got Joseph K., our producer. What's going on, JK?
Hey, Jim. Andrew, what's going on?
Yeah, Andrew Lewis. How's it going, man? How you feeling?
I feel okay. A little under the weather, but coming out of it. It's not hot enough in Texas to sweat it out. So I'm just kind of sitting in this lull of sickness a little bit, but I'm feeling better.
Yeah, it's been a little while since we've gotten the crew together, but we wanted to twist things up a little bit. Lead off with the angle of attack for this episode before we get into the main interview. So, in any case, we've got a discussion around Old Charlie, this golf course development. Really excited. We haven't really had an architecture bent episode in quite a while. So I'm really interested to get in the weeds on this. Really, they turned sort of the country club model on its head. So I think this is something that folks might be interested in, looking for a destination golf course. I'm ready to sign over a check if I can talk Sue into it. I'm ready to do that right now. But really interesting. I really enjoy when people are really kind of pushing the envelopes, pushing the boundaries, and challenging the paradigm in lots of ways in this sport. So I hope folks get a lot out of that. But really, we're talking about the peak junior and amateur part of the season, really kind of the Super Bowl of both junior and amateur golf right around the corner. We've got the U.S. Junior at Trinity Forest. We've got the U.S. Amateur at Olympic Club. Joseph, I know that you spent time at both of these courses just recently. I see your hat. You've got an Olympic Club hat. And I just wanted to get your take, as a caddy, someone who's going to be caddying for these two events. What's your take on these golf courses? What do you think around the strengths in terms of maybe the type of player that each course is going to maybe favor as we get into that, and just any sort of tips for preparation for someone who might be in either one of these events or both?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to open and caddy at Trinity Forest back in 2016, 2017. And the thing that stands out to me is, when Jordan Spieth won in 2017 at Royal Birkdale, it was no surprise to any of the caddies. I mean, every time I'd go into the caddy shack, there'd be a story about how Jordan was draining 30, 40, 50 footers all day. So as you can imagine, Trinity Forest, depending on the weather, it can blow out there, but it's going to be a putting contest. It's going to be a chipping contest. It's going to be, who can hit the best shots off of that zoysia. You're always going to have a great lie. We saw the Texas A&M last year. Reese Roberts won in 2024. He shot 19 under over 4 rounds. So if you can get some good weather and it doesn't blow out there, I would expect a birdie fest and a putting contest out there. And then as far as Olympic Club, being out there last week, completely different championship track. Colton Oast won it back in 2007, and I think 7 over was kind of the cut line after 2 days. And you pointed this out too when we were on property, that the cypress trees are just so massive and the scale of the property is so big that it can be a little disorienting. The wind is pretty much always blowing off the coast from the west, but there's the lake course is a big golf course. There's some long holes, and what's interesting is the last couple holes, I think, are birdie holes. You got a par 5, par 4 finish. So that's going to be some fireworks, I think. And then what was interesting was the ocean course. The rough was just up. It was insane how thick the rough was there. So I'll be interested to see if they cut it or they grow out the lake rough. But yeah, it's right there in front of you. There's going to be some hard holes. There's going to be some stretches where if you're not hitting it great, you're going to get punished. But it's right there in front of you, and I think it's going to be a good test. And one thing to watch out for, Jim, is those cypress trees. If you hit them into them, they will eat your balls. So I think we lost a couple of balls over the last couple of days. So it was kind of interesting wrinkle that you don't normally see with those big canopy cypress trees. But yeah, it's a great test, and looking forward to it.
Well, that should make for some great drama, right? Someone losing their ball with the match on the line or whatever. And I think I didn't see the beginning stretch of holes, but you had mentioned that the early stretch of holes is really kind of the toughest stretch. So I think depending on when you tee off and around, but you could come out of the gates maybe 4 over par through 6 or 7 holes, but still have an opportunity to stay in it. And I think it's going to really test probably the mental fortitude of these golfers to kind of stay in the fight, probably shooting a number that they're much higher shooting than they would normally shoot in a normal round.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to shift gears and maybe focus this episode at Angle of Attack and Andrew and get your perspective a little bit related, I guess a lot of it related, around match play. I know we talked about match play mindset around this time last year and how to prepare really kind of for these two big events. But I wanted to get your take on, I was listening to a No Lane Up podcast where Kevin Van Velkenberg sort of did a deep dive on Seve Ballesteros. Now, like this younger generation of folks, like they would probably only know of Seve because they sort of like wheel out the ghost of Seve around the Ryder Cup. Like there was like the last one was like a huge tribute to Seve, and they use him as a rallying cry. But there's two things that I sort of know about Seve, having sort of grown up with in sort of his generation, is a his ability to get up and down at anywhere is like world famous. Absolutely, like he hit it all over the place, but he was able to just manufacture shots, and I think he won 5 majors. But and just not really knowing where it's going to go off the tee, but he was never really out of a hole, which makes him a very, very dangerous match play player. But then the other thing is that he notorious for his sort of gamesmanship against opponents, especially in the match play scenario. And match play just has this element of it, which I think is different than stroke play, around this sort of mental kind of mano a mano battle, and in some cases, like some gamesmanship. And I wanted to get your take, like around, I think in match play is kind of all is fair, but like, is there a place for it? Are you for it? Are you against it? Are there times when if you see it happening, like how do you respond to it? Just because it's probably new to a lot, especially junior golfers, just sort of this match play environment and how they respond to maybe someone, trying to get under their skin a little bit.
Yeah, I would say in general, most players that play match play that don't have a lot of experience definitely like play very different than they would if they were playing stroke play. When you're playing stroke play, you're not even like thinking about the other person. There's no such thing as like, having to give a putt or, in junior golf, like half the time the kids don't even play like the honor on the tee box. So one, I would say as much as you can, like if that's who you are, like when you're playing with your buddies and you're kind of that like fiery guy, then yes, like you should probably embrace that heading into that and almost be like a character. Like I'm going to show up to this being very much like Seve, or someone like Justin Thomas. But then, you think about like Tiger when he was in his prime playing this stuff, like he was that way, but like very, very late in matches. He wasn't like showing up from hole one doing that. So I think that it's, especially in like a match play setting when you're playing, 5, 6, 7 times, like my concern would be if someone's going in and giving so much attention and energy to that, like you're going to totally wear yourself out. But I would be one that's like, let the match build and like almost like you've got 2 or 3 opportunities to probably, get under someone's skin and probably wait for like the right time to do that, especially at the end of the match. The other thing I think about is like, people will say all the time, like, oh, I would hate to play that guy in match play. And I don't necessarily think that's because they're like this gamesmanship or like this cocky person. It's because of what you said. Like they're that annoying person that just always finds a way of making par. Like that's the most annoying person to play in match play. So in my mind, I would rather be that cat who shows like no emotion and is just like a robot, and the guy just can't stand that I show no emotion. I'm getting up and down every time. It's a little bit of like false bravado to me to be like over the top for just no reason, especially like early in the match. You'll even see that with guys in the Ryder Cup. Like they're giving putts they probably wouldn't give later, like early in the match. Like, oh yeah, that 2 or 3 footer is good, but they wouldn't give that on 16. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship that in too. Like, well, you gave me that earlier. Yeah, but that was 2 hours ago. So, let that develop a little bit.
I think the other thing, why don't we go there? Like conceding putts. I mean, I witnessed a match recently where it was the 18th hole. one person was one down and had to like two putt from 3 feet to extend the match. And like, is there a situation where I mean, I guess technically that person could lip out, like power lip out, spin it out to 4 feet and maybe miss it coming back. Like, would you never give that putt in that situation just because it's kind of the 18th hole? Or like, I'm just wondering, is that gamesmanship? Or like, I kind of viewed it as maybe trying to change the momentum of the match, like just change sort of the rhythm of the match. Because like if one guy's just got it going and they have the momentum, like maybe it's worth just trying to change it up a little bit and seeing if you can get them out of their kind of rhythm in some fashion. Like maybe that's a good opportunity. And it's probably not even gamesmanship. It's just like, yeah, you're allowed to not concede a putt. And yeah, why don't you, 99.9% of the time you're going to be able to two putt from this distance, but just do it. Like just go for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay to be like, hey, I want to, even though I'm in for 5 and you have a putt for 3, like, yeah, show me your first putt. They're probably pretty nervous. Maybe they do hit it 2 or 3 feet past. In that situation where you're going to extra holes too, like, maybe they miss it. Maybe they miss the 3-footer and tap it in, but that kind of gets in their head too of like, well, I just missed a 3-footer. If you just give it to them, I mean, that's okay, but I think it does cost a little bit more stress. Just even like having to go through the read and like just the pressure of like making a 3-footer when you know you have to a little bit. Could just be a little bit of drain on the battery. I probably wouldn't have given it, just let them hit that first putt, or I would have let them get like right before they hit and then like on their backswing, I would have said, that's good, and picked it up. That would have been more gamesmanship. But the other flip side of anything is like, do you want to poke the bear? Like, are you sure you want to, this kid just goes and like just rams in the back and like picks his ball up and goes to the next tee, and you're like almost like make them more mad. Maybe that gets them off their game, but some people just respond like totally differently. Like you almost get them more fired up. So I think you have to read the person you're playing and be careful not to like let that flip in their favor.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think one thing you hit on earlier that I wanted to explore, you said sort of like being true to yourself. And there was one example in the same tournament that in a match that I was sort of watching, and I heard about it, and the person that ended up losing the match was friends with the person they lost to. But this person by nature is like very friendly, very outgoing. And he sort of said to his opponent on the first hole, like, "Hey, so and so, I know we're buddies, but I'm not going to talk to you this round." And to me, that's sort of like you're sort of giving in to that person, or you're being maybe less true to yourself. Like you should have them, if anything, you should maybe go the other direction, like talk to that person even more,
Yeah.
because you're sort of now you're holding the cards, like you're sort of putting the match more in and your side of the scale as opposed to like adapting your style, just because you happen to be friends with this guy that you're playing.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in the Ryder Cup. The guys that are like super over the top, like JT, they're kind of always like that, And like you look at like Victor and Ludwig that are always smiling and like happy-go-lucky. They're the same way in their matches. So I would say, in general, like who you are, try to be that person as much as you can because you're probably going to play your best golf that way. And the person that you're playing against, maybe that's the gameship that kind of rubs them the wrong way, that you're just over there smiling even though you just lost a hole. You're not showing much emotion. So as much as you can, I think staying in your persona, your character, is probably going to be more beneficial than trying to be like, Tiger 2000 or like Tiger against Stephen Ames, where you just are like a robot. Very few people can do that. You could be like, well, Brooks Koepka acts like that, but Brooks Koepka acts like that, every time he plays.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing you also mentioned that's interesting to me is with the U.S. Junior at Trinity Forest. Given it's over multiple days, it's likely to be very, very hot. You said spending this energy, this mental energy, focusing on something or making it more than just the golf shots in order to try to get under someone's skin when maybe that energy and that focus could just be on, closing that match out early. It's that week's going to be a marathon test for whoever makes it to the final day. And I think it's probably not the best opportunity to be like wasting a lot of energy trying to, worry about what someone else is doing or how they're responding or, trying to get under their skin.
Yeah, I think when most people get done with a match, and especially when they lose, I think they'll look back and they almost always say like, "Man, if I just would have played like I would normally in stroke play, I think I would have won that." It's just so easy to make so many little decisions or have so many thoughts that are so dependent on what the person you're playing is. Versus if you just would focus on the chip shot that you want to hit, versus like, "Oh, I got to make this to have the hole." Like those just little bits of stress that are caused, which over time, we're talking, these guys are going to be playing 2 matches a day. I mean, you're going to be with warm ups, you're talking 10, 11, 12-hour days. I would just be very conscious of, my brain is a battery. And after so much time, especially in the heat, getting dehydrated, I just have to be really careful not to waste any of that time and attention on anything like that. And so as much as someone can, that's probably where you need to have some affirmations about like focus on myself, choose the shot I want to hit, things like that. They're going to be like reminders because it is for whatever reason, it is just so hard to match play to not get focused on what they're doing and for you to focus on what you want to do on this hole.
Yeah. And we talked about this last time, but I think one of the pitfalls that could happen in match play is being too conservative because maybe you're the player had already hit and they're sort of out of position. And then, but if you had a green light situation, at least you're trying to birdie that hole and close it out. Like generally these players are very good. Trinity Forest, you're always gonna have a good lie. It's like you're gonna be able to get up and down quite a bit of time. So I think just like assuming someone's gonna make a bogey because they hit in the bunker or miss the green, I think is can be fool's errand for sure.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Like you've got to stick to your game plan as much as you can. I mean, and maybe if somebody hits it out of bounds and it's kind of a tight tee shot and you want to hit 3 iron because now if you make four, you're going to win the hole. I mean, but even then, like I would always go, what would I do in stroke play here? What you're doing in stroke play is likely the highest percentage play a majority of the time, and that's what you should do. That kind of goes back to that whole like I'm just making decisions based on what they're doing, which it's kind of like when the Falcons lost to the Patriots, right? Like once you take your foot off the gas, like it's very very easy to like almost start telling yourself, like convincing yourself of there's a way that I can blow this almost versus like okay I'm gonna win this hole. I'm gonna make birdie. I'm gonna make eagle on this hole. I'm not laying up on this par five because he's hitting the hazard. Like I would go for the screen 100% of the time if I was playing by myself. So I think the more you can stay in that mindset, especially too, like you can live with that. You can live with the result of that. I think if you start changing your strategy and it doesn't go well, it's very easy to second guess that, which in match play, 50% of it's just mental. So the last thing you want to do is start questioning, like, did I make the right decisions? It's okay to make good decisions and then have bad shots happen. Sometimes we hit bad shots. You can't avoid that. But making bad decisions and then hitting bad shots, it's so hard to recover from in match play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what makes match play so compelling. Really excited to see how these two events, I mean, we talked about it, Joseph, last time. This US Junior is going to be an absolute banger. Probably one of the most hotly contested in history, frankly. And then the US Junior or the US Amateur Olympic Club, I think will be a true, championship test for whoever makes it that far. And we love hearing these stories. So if folks get in the heat of the battle and yeah, maybe someone tried to get under their skin, and maybe it's just a match for your club championship. These are the things that we like to hear about. So send us a note, send us a DM, reach out to Andrew Lewis Golf on Instagram if you have any questions, and yeah, we'll pick it up next time. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. Cliff McKinney, welcome to the Driven Golf Podcast. How's it going?
Hey, great to be here, Jim. Appreciate it.
I have to say, I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now. So Cliff is the founder or co-founder of Old Charlie Golf Club, a new golf course that's going to be built in the Panhandle of Florida, and we'll get into all the details. But I think it has a very unique twist. But when I heard about it a month or two ago, I was like, I got to reach out to this guy. I got to find out more about this project. Not only is it built by two of my favorite guys, Keith and Riley, and we'll get into that. But I think you're putting a different twist and kind of challenging the paradigm, I think, of what private golf means
in this country, and I'm always excited for people that are willing to put themselves out there and push the envelope. So all that said,
Absolutely.
like I think we have to go back to the beginning. What are your roots in the game? Like how did you get started in the game?
Yeah. So my dad played golf. I grew up in Aiken County, which is suddenly a hotbed for golf these
Yeah,
days,
for
but it
sure.
wasn't quite so much when I was growing up. I grew up in a small town called Jackson, South Carolina. And my dad played. Um, uh, he'd been playing since he was kind of a younger adult. And we happened to live near a little tiny 9-hole golf course. It's shuttered now, but it was called Jim and Lily Golf Club. And really, that was probably a wedge shot from the backyard of our house to the dog leg on number 8 there. So just about every day during the summer, I'd grow up, you know, start first thing in the morning, get dropped off there by my mom, or just walk across the neighbor's backyard to the dog leg on 8, and then play my way through, and then loop around 9 holes with tons of people. Most of them probably pretty aggravated at this little kid tagging along, but some of them were awful nice, and so sort of grew a love for the game doing that. And there happened to be a lot of kids that lived in my really close neighborhood that were all the same age, all grew up playing golf at this little Jim and Lily Golf Club, and all still play golf now. And one of them happened to be the grandson of the family that owned it. So sort of had an in there, was able to kind of play for not a lot of money, which was great back then because we didn't have a lot. And then eventually rolled that into a job where I kind of ran the shop for a little while.
Oh, that's really neat. It's I didn't live near a golf course, but like your background in terms of jumping on a course or playing municipal courses like that, that's true for me as well. And the more people I talk to, even folks now that maybe they play some of the nicest golf courses in the world, like their beginnings and their roots kind of started just knocking it around at the local 9-hole course. And I think like in a lot of ways, it's probably like the lifeblood of the game for so many folks. So we definitely need to, you know, be mindful of that.
And that's one of the things that you don't want to see die, but particularly down here in Florida, that kind of place is getting a little bit harder to find. But you're right. I've got a lot of friends that grew up and play today. You know, some of the best courses in the world, or members at some of the best courses in the world. But yeah, they grew up in the local muni, or they grew up in the little 9-hole golf course, or a par 3, or whatever it is, and that to me, that basis is what really grows the game, right? Is getting folks from sort of different walks of life all involved, doing it for a little bit less expense and that kind of thing. And so, I'm super thankful that I got to grow up in that environment, and I certainly hope that it continues to be a sort of a funnel for golfers going forward.
And I guess related to that, like your upbringing, can you articulate like how it has maybe like shaped you as a person, shaped you as a golfer, like shaped your views on the game? Because I think in a lot of ways it probably is a byproduct of those beginnings.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm a big believer in the power of golf to make people better, both on an individual level and kind of at a group level, and that's certainly what it did for me. It gave me something to do during the summer, which was harder when we were growing up. We didn't have the internet or ready available iPads or anything like that, and so it definitely gave me something to do. It taught me about teamwork. It taught me about perseverance. It taught me about the value of practice. All of those things that you can take into a bunch of different arenas in your life and really use. One example that I think resonates still with me to this day is when I was working as a cart guy. I worked at a little club in Aiken County called Cedar Creek Golf Club. And I was just a cart guy, just washing up carts at the end of the day. And we had one assistant pro that it was always his MO is once he shut down the shop, he would come down and help us wash up the carts and all of that kind of stuff. And I still use that as an example of like, hey, here's a boss that does, something for his employees that's really above and beyond sort of the normal. and he doesn't do it for any particular reason other than, he respects what we were doing and we respected what he was doing. And I still use that as an example of the way that a boss should sort of behave, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's taught me an awful lot. And the golf didn't stop at childhood. I went on to play college golf and then work as assistant pro for a little while too. So it's really part of a big part of my life.
And I read somewhere that you were also a high school golf coach for a few years. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I went through I most recent career is in the finance field, but I went through a couple of different sort of career options prior to that. And one of those was assistant golf pro, and another one was a teacher. I taught high school English for 3 years and coached the golf team at Darlington High School and at Camden High School in South Carolina.
Oh, that's really neat. So yeah, it's a kind of a way of giving back. I think it's you had some golf wisdom and golf had taken you places, and the opportunity to pour into some young people that had been really neat.
Yeah, it was so much fun. We had a blast, and it was really it's really rewarding to see those guys kind of grow because oftentimes you start with them pretty young, and I only taught for a few years, but even just the progression over a couple of years for some of these kids was amazing. And I remember at Camden we had one game that we would play that the kids absolutely hated that but I loved, and they still come back and tell me how cool it was to play that. We did a sort of what we called a reverse scramble. So you'd tee off with 2 balls and you'd have to take the worst one. And then you hit the approach shot from the worst shot, you'd take 2 and have to hit the worst one and do that. And that was something that, we kind of used to instill sort of a course management perspective, a discipline perspective, and the kids still are appreciative of it today. So
that's funny. I actually wrote a blog post specifically on the benefits of worst ball scramble. I think one of the things.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, is you realize the importance of having a 4-footer versus a 5-footer, or a 3-footer versus a 4-footer when you have to make 2 of them, right?
Yeah, it's massive on the greens. Absolutely.
Yeah. You get better real quick. I think it exposes the flaws in your game if you it shows where you can't really hit consistently good shots.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think you and I are kindred spirits, honestly, like just in terms of our background and just passion for the game. I've had these thoughts bouncing around in my head around, wouldn't it be great to start a golf club? Or like if I ever got a chance to start a golf club, it would look a certain way, would be a certain way. Is this sort of like a culmination of thoughts that have been kind of bouncing around your head as you've gone through your career? Like obviously you had a corporate career, but like, is this something that you had this like early thought and then I'm interested to see how it became a reality? This is pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's the sort of the general idea of building a golf course has been in the headspace for probably a decade. And it really started. Jim and Lily had shut down the little 9-hole course that we grew up on, and the impetus for this started when my brother and I looked into the potential to buy it and take it back open, and renovate it a little bit. And we had sort of a very, very limited amount of land to work with, and we had sort of certain parameters. So in that way, it was kind of similar to what you saw with Sweetens Cove or something like that, right? Where you had just a flat 9-hole golf course on 70 acres or something like that. And then these guys came in and kind of made some challenging additions, and then made the sort of the atmosphere a little bit more laid back. And obviously it took a little bit of while, but it kind of became a cult hit pretty quickly. So we were looking at that. I'd played there and was certainly inspired by that place. It brought back a lot of the memories that I had growing up on the little 9-hole public golf course. Some of the same vibe, different people, but kind of a similar area. So we wanted to see if we could kind of recreate that. And that was really where this whole thing started. And just to talk a little bit about the evolution of it, the first inkling of sort of doing a little bit something different was a result of taking a look at the kind of people that might come to this little 9-hole golf course in Jackson, South Carolina, which is kind of it's close to Aiken and it's close to Augusta, but it's a little ways out. And we had sort of two very distinct customer bases, if you will. One was sort of the daily play, the retirees, the folks that were going to be out there on a daily basis and generally take up sort of the weekday tee times. And then we had this big influx of traffic that would come through Jackson from the nuclear weapons facility. We call it the bomb plant. It's Savannah River site. Now they're into doing nuclear cleanup and waste cleanup and that kind of thing. But a ton of folks from Aiken and Augusta work at that place. And so there's a ton of traffic that comes through Jackson on their way home to Aiken or Augusta. So we looked at sort of building a golf course within a golf course and setting up some par 3 tees and having those lit. So we'd capture that traffic and get a little bit more evening traffic. And, sort of one thing led to another. Ultimately decided not to go that route, partly just because of the population constraints and the challenges related to that. But some of those ideas sort of kind of carried through the whole thing. And then you're right, a lot of it was also about the golf experiences that I'd had over the years and some of the good times that I'd had. I've been friends with the same three guys, the same foursome for probably a decade now. We've taken a lot of really, really great golf trips. Went to Pinehurst, went to Stream Song, did a trip to Myrtle Beach, all of those kinds of places, and really brought back some great memories. We went to Macklemore and Sweetens Cove, did sort of a 3-day weekend between those two. And so pulling from those experiences and particularly the things that were memorable for us from those experiences, and then also just my childhood, growing up at Jim and Lily, growing up at this public golf course, and then going to work as an assistant pro at Highlands Country Club, which was the absolute opposite of what Jim and Lily was. And Highlands was a very, very private, sort of pretty formal country club type of place. So you kind of take one, and it's a really, really great Donald Ross design, Singing in the Mountains, great condition all the time. So you sort of take aspects of that, you take aspects of the childhood on the public golf course, some of the other experiences, you mash them all together, and this is sort of what you get, right?
Yeah. So before we get into some of the details around the membership, which I think is very unique, I haven't seen anything quite like it here in the U.S. Can we talk a little bit about the name Old Charlie? Because I think it has a pretty interesting background.
Yeah. Old Charlie is one of the few things that really hasn't changed since the very beginning of this project. That name has always been the name of the golf club or the name of the project. And it's really based on two folks named Charlie that were pretty important to my history and to my family's history. One was Charlie Steed. And Charlie Steed was the man that built Jim and Lily Golf Club, the 9-hole golf course. So the part of the name originated from that. My dad was involved in some of the construction aspects and did maintenance work and built some of the bunkers out there and all of that. So he did a lot just by building that golf course and making it affordable for folks on this side of the river, so to speak. So sort of wanted to honor him and honor that. And then the other was an ancestor of mine who grew up near Spruce Pine, North Carolina. This man's name was Charlie McKinney. He was known as Old Cove Charlie. He had 4 wives, 48 children. And there's this really nice little apple orchard on the Blue Ridge Parkway right near Spruce Pine. And you go to that apple orchard during the summertime, and you can take a hayride back through some of the orchards and learn about the apple varieties, but they also tell stories about Charlie McKinney, which is kind of cool.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of people in the Carolinas that might be an ancestor of old Charles McKinney.
If you go to Spruce Pine, and there's an interesting thing with Spruce Pine too, but that we'll talk about. But if you go to Spruce Pine and you look in the phone book, there are more McKinneys in Spruce Pine than there are Smiths. So he was pretty prolific in that area, and by all accounts, it was a different time. It was in the mountains, and nobody really paid much attention to sort of what was going on. And the story goes that he sort of carried this pack on his back, and then he would set it down on the porch of the wife he wanted to spend the the night with that evening. And when he came back from work, if it was still out on the patio, then he'd know he'd have to go to the next house. But if it was brought in, then he was okay to stay there that night. So who knows whether that's apocryphal or not, but pretty cool.
So I've seen your logo, and it has
Yeah.
an older gentleman carrying the pack. Is that the roots of that? Okay.
Yeah, they're two characters, and we thought it'd be really fun to sort of pay some homage to them. And you're right, sort of the vagabond, that part of that is a tribute to old Charlie McKinney. The other part is just that the nature of the golf course. We wanted to sort of evoke the idea that this is a place that you spend a little bit of time at each year. It's more of a destination place than a place you're going to call home all the time.
Yeah. I like that. So, okay, so you had this idea, and like, how did it actually come about in terms of both like finding the site? I don't know if you looked at multiple sites when you moved away from the 9-hole idea, in terms of like scoping out different lands, properties that were out there, where you focused on a certain area, and you kind of found this property. And then after, once we go there, like, I want to talk about, how you landed on with Keith and Riley in terms of, picking them as the architects, because I'm really fascinated around that process as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can probably cover both questions with the same answer, to be honest with you. The idea had evolved, and it sort of gotten to a place where we knew that we wanted to do something a little bit different with the membership model. And what I didn't have the best sense of at the time was, look, what does constructing a golf course consist of? What drives costs higher? What drives costs lower? What types of landforms are you looking for? All of those kinds of things. I knew from sort of reading Doak's books and studying the fried egg and that kind of thing. Sort of, I was a little bit of an architecture geek, but still thinking about it practically was something that I didn't have a tremendous amount of experience. So to be honest, I rang up Keith, because I knew he was in Orlando or Winter Park. He lived in Winter Park, which was pretty close to where I am here in Jacksonville. And I also knew that, the golf course that they built at Winter Park 9, they got it in some respects. So they're interested in expanding the game, making it more accessible to more folks, and understand that there's a cost component of that, right? So really wanted to kind of pick his brain, and get a sense from Keith of, sort of what does this look like? What does the construction process look like, and all of that. And we kind of struck up a friendship from there. He was gracious enough to agree to meet with me, and for not a whole lot in return at that point. But we stuck up a friendship and kind of kept in touch. And I was looking at a few particular areas of the country, really looking at places that people already traveled to go on vacation or go on golf trips, that kind of thing. And there were certain parameters that we had around cost per acre and that kind of thing that we wanted to stay with. So we really honed in on this area north of 30A on the Florida Panhandle, and that's primarily where we looked. This is north of Destin, Fort Walton Beach, that area. Directly north of that, about 25 miles, and just south of Interstate 10, there's really, really interesting land there. It's not like nothing else in Florida. It's super hilly. It's mostly sand based if you stay out of the wetlands and things like that. And so we kind of honed in on that area. We also knew that Dream Golf had recently announced a project north of Panama City, which was in that same area with the same kind of landform. So we zeroed in on that, and I looked at a bunch of different properties, and we came across this one that was really just sort of tailor-made for what we were trying to do. It had the right acreage, around 200 acres, completely dry, tons of elevation change overall, but also lots of internal movement. So took a shot and secured that land, and then brought Keith out, and luckily, he was able to pretty quickly confirm that we had a good site on our hands, and we were sort of off to the races from there.
That's fantastic. And then I had Brian Schneider on
Yeah.
He co-designed Old Barnwell, which was kind of in your old neck of the woods, right? So, and he talked about how he and Blake Conan, like, it's a very similar story. Like he was helping, just basically just helping out Nick Schreiber in terms of identifying, potential areas to look at, whether or not a property had promise or not, with
Yeah.
maybe some small hope that they would get the job at someday. But I think just more
Right.
interested in, there's really good land here and wanting to see great golf and these projects come to fruition, because I think the game benefits at large. And it sounds like because
Yeah.
of the relationship formed up, like Keith, was probably just super engaged in wanting to see this thing happen. So I was really interested and excited for them. I know that I met Keith back when he was helping build Cabot Cliffs for Core and
Okay, great.
Crenshaw. This was probably about 12 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I've met Riley any number of times. But like, just for background for our listeners, this Brian, Keith, Riley, this is like the next generation of great architects, right? They've, for a while
Absolutely.
now, like the great golf course is kind of dominated by the Doak, Corin Crenshaw, Gil Hance, David Kidd to some extent. And these are all the guys that had done a lot of the work for kind of the Mount Rushmore of modern designers, and
Yeah.
learning from those guys, but also doing a lot of the great work for those guys, like shaping a lot of those features that we love on those great golf courses. And these guys are extremely talented. So it's awesome now that we're having this kind of this boom, post-COVID boom of golf courses, that these guys are getting these opportunities to kind of show their stuff under their own brand. And like you said, with the Winter Park 9 and some of the stuff they've already done, they've already showcased their ability, to go out on their own. So I'm really excited for those guys.
Yeah. Keith and Riley are both just great individuals. I think Keith and I hit it off pretty quickly. Like I said before, I think from sort of a our perspective on the game, we're very similar. They want to see different things being done that can expand the game in one way or another, whether it's growing it, making it accessible to more folks, making it a little bit easier road to entry from places like Top Golf or Pop Stroke or whatever it is. They're interested in building those kinds of projects. So really, really good fit. And they're also not particularly interested in sort of this massive development type of piece of it. They want to sit on a bulldozer and build a golf course, and that's what we're going to let them do, right? So I think it's a really, really good fit. And you're right, these guys, and I'm partial to Core and Crenshaw, big fans of those guys. They're fellow alums. I went to Wake Forest for a couple of years, so I have a little bit of a interest in what they do from that perspective. And I knew that Keith had done work on Old Town up in Winston-Salem. And you're right. I mean, they worked for Core Crenshaw for the better part of a decade, both of them. Riley did a little bit of work for Doak before that. So they've worked with the very best of the best. And Keith, he was a primary shaper on Cabot St. Lucia for an extended period of time. That was during COVID, where he stayed and a few other guys stayed, and then the rest of the team went to New Zealand. And so you're right. A lot of these golf courses, these iconic golf courses that you hear about, that you see on the rankings, that sometimes you get the opportunity to play, like Stream Song Red or Sheep Ranch, Cabot Cliffs, both the Cabot properties. You're going to see these guys work there. They've done a lot of the bunkers
Yeah,
and greens and other landforms.
that's really neat. So you mentioned a little bit about the property, but like when you were out there and walking the property with those guys, was it consistent? Like, did you formulate sort of what your vision of what the club could potentially be? Once you were able to see the land, and obviously you had certain things that you want this club to be about, and I think great, compelling golf has to be at or near the top of the list. But like, what do you think this property offers in terms of making it a memorable golf course that people going to want to come back to year after year?
Yeah. So we had our constraints, right? We knew that we wanted to stay within a certain approximate cost per acre. we knew that we wanted a certain amount of acreage, dry acreage, and we didn't want a whole lot more than that. And that's all to sort of lower costs. We'll talk about why that's important. But beyond that, what we were looking for was, what most of your developers are looking for in a golf course these days, not particularly interested in being in an urban center. Close by is good, great for us. And being so close to the beach is awesome, but we're certainly sort of away from commercial centers and that kind of thing. And then you're looking for a lot of interesting landform, a lot of interesting internal movement, and a lot of sand. And if you can find all of those things in one site, then you really struck gold, and that's what we got out of this site.
Yeah, you mentioned Dream Golf with the Kaisers in terms of, like, a lot of people think like, oh, that's competition, but in a lot of ways, I think it's validation that, this area, they only build on really compelling projects, right? It's like best of the best land, and it sort of like gives people another reason to come to that area, which I think is a hook for someone who's maybe looking to maybe justify, the decision to join Old Charlie, because you could maybe loop them in, or you're bringing guests or whatever. All of a sudden, like the value proposition, I think, is kind of magnifies as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Kaiser himself who said that that one golf course is just a golf course, but more than one golf course is a destination, right? Well, they're building one right now. Tom Doak is building it, and we're building another one pretty close by. So it's a destination. They're absolutely, I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. You're going to see continued development in that area of the country over the next few years. And part of the reason why is just south of there is some of the most beautiful beaches in the country. The Emerald Coast is what they call it because of the color of the water. White sand beaches, emerald water, really, really fun place to be. And something that's, there's a little bit for everyone there, from Fort Walton all the way down to Panama City and beyond. So that's a big reason why I think they're in the area. That's certainly a big reason why we're in the area. And you're right. I think it's more validation of what we're doing than it's competition in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dig into the membership model. You touched on it a little bit. I think we're gonna have to spend quite a bit of time on this, because I think it's simple in nature, but it deviates so drastically from what we're used to from a private country club model in the US that it might take a little bit to explain. So, here in the US, we build these giant walls around these country clubs. We don't let people in. You pay a giant initiation fee to keep the riffraff out. You pay your dues, and you get to play as much golf as you want. And that's sort of the trade-off, is like, all right, you're not going to have a lot of competition for tee times. You're not going to have to worry about public golfers, so to speak. Like, you're paying for that exclusivity. Like, how is your business model and your membership model differ from what we would typically think of private golf here in the United States?
Yeah, so I think the good parallel is take a vacation or a destination private club. So you mentioned two of them already. Tree Farm and Old Barnwell are both sort of destination clubs. Most of the folks that are members there don't live in that area. They come in, 2 or 3 times a year. They bring their friends. They're going to play a few rounds, and then they're going to go back to their respective homes and play their home course, right? And if you can afford to do something like that at a place like Tree Farm or at a place like Old Barnwell, then that's amazing, and you kind of have the run of the place. And so what we thought was, well, if we can take everything that's great about those private destination clubs, and some of it's sort of the pure golf aspect, some of it's sort of the minimalism on facilities aspect, some of it's just the a little bit more laid back, a little bit more you have the run of the place kind of atmosphere. If we can bring some of those elements, but make it less expensive for folks, then we think we've got, sort of a good formula there. And what we came up with was, well, look, if you're only coming once a year or a weekend every year or 4 or 5 days every year, if you tell us what those days are, then we can give the rest of the time to other people. And that allows us to spread the cost of operating the golf club. That allows us to spread the cost of the initiation fee across a much, much larger population of folks. But you still retain all of the sort of the benefits that you get from a private club. So we've got a lot of control over the tee sheet. We're limiting our tee sheet to 72 players maximum a day. So that's about 15 minutes or so between tee times. You'll never see anybody unless you want to. So it's going to be, it's going to have that private club feel in that way. But you're not going to pay, anywhere from $50,000 upwards to $250,000 to play, because you're not going to get unlimited access. You say, okay, give me a weekend in the spring, and I'm going to come every year that same spring weekend, and the initiation fee for something like that is around $1,000. And the annual dues, you're only paying for the days that you play. So again, the annual dues are $150, which covers your golf, covers your cart, all of that. So it's taking sort of that private destination club model, but trying to make it more accessible to a lot more folks. So that's sort of the concept. And again, part of that comes from, I'm not interested in necessarily, I think there's room for these types of clubs, and I think it's great if you can afford to join a club like this, but I'm not necessarily interested in building another place that's sort of walled off from folks. I want more of the kind of experience that I had with a kid and as a kid. And this allows us to do a little bit more of that. It allows us to make, this great, what's going to be a fantastic golf course accessible to a lot more folks.
So you're a finance guy. I was a finance guy. So how many iterations of the spreadsheet and tweaks did you have to go through to realize hey, we have something here, under these set of parameters, this thing could actually work?
Yeah, there were a lot of iterations and a lot of discussion. The original concept, we weren't even sure if it was going to be a full 18-hole golf course. We had sort of something like an oversized golf course, but maybe fewer holes in mind, with variety of tee boxes and that kind of thing. So the project kind of evolved over time, and ultimately we went with a little bit more of a traditional look for the golf course, and we can get into that too. But yeah, part of the trick is, if you're going to do something like this, then you have to make sure that there's sufficient time set aside for maintenance and for weather events and things like that. So that was most of sort of the calculations on the spreadsheet is, look, how many playable days can we actually set a year? And then how many days do we have to set aside so that everybody gets a consistent experience, so that everybody they're able to play in the sunshine, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was really the formula that we played around with a lot. We looked at weather patterns. We looked at making sure that there was plenty of time for maintenance, never being open on weeks that you punch greens and stuff like that. And ultimately kind of landed on, okay, we're going to have about 220 or so days every year that are reserved for these reservations. And then we're going to hold back another, 140 or so for those weather events and for maintenance and things like that. So that was a lot of it. And then the rest of it, to be honest, was just taking a look at the math of construction costs versus membership costs and how all that kind of played out, and trying to do everything we could to make the golf course experience, the golf experience itself, as elite as possible, but to not go beyond that. Right. The golf course experience is great. We're going to have a great golf course, built by great guys. We're going to have great maintenance routine. It's going to be in perfect condition every time you come out. We're going to have 2 or 3 beverage carts, so you never have an issue with, your drink being empty before you run into the next lady. But we're not going to have, white linen tablecloth dining, formal dining room, anything like that. So a little bit of an anti-country club, or a little bit of a minimal sort of approach to the country club atmosphere from that perspective. So, we talked about cost a little bit before. A lot of the parameters around the land, a lot of the parameters around the facilities were built with kind of keeping costs to a relative minimum in mind.
I think part of that was really around the clubhouse area, right? It's more free form, open clubhouse, kind of more of like a hang spot, right? And I think
Yeah.
I saw some mention of like live music in the evening and those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's we call it Goat Track Hill. It's kind of a nod to the goat track we grew up on. And the idea is, yeah, this is the clubhouse is sort of a clubhouse without walls type of concept. There's going to be plenty of sort of indoor covered air conditioned space. We are in Florida after all. Um, but we want it to be a place where people gather, where people hang out. We want it to be a lot more laid back than what you see at most country clubs. A place where you can kick up your feet, listen to a little bit of live music. We're not going to go crazy with like super loud rock and roll, but having, a couple of acoustic guitars out there in the evenings, having a really, really good grill instead of, a restaurant with appetizers and full menu and all of that is kind of the objective. So it's really about, like I said, enhancing the golf experience, but making sure that we don't really go beyond that. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dive a little bit more into, I would call them like the membership use cases. You threw out some numbers, but for somebody who's like really intrigued, like this sounds cool. It makes me wonder, like, why hasn't someone done this before? Because it makes a lot of sense the more you think about it. But just, I think you outlined a couple like potential use cases on your website. Can you maybe go through some of those things that you've envisioned? Like, hey, we think we'll get a bunch of members interested in this sort of thing, and these are sort of the parameters that would cost versus somebody who wants to come out in a different way, just sort of the pricing scheme, like in terms of the range of prices that for someone who was interested in joining.
Yeah. I think the easiest thing to keep in mind, sort of as I run through a couple of these, is that you're paying by the reservation, and a reservation is nothing more than just a single tee time on a particular day, right? So you can get as little as a single reservation. That gives you one day by yourself every year for as long as you want to be a member. And something like that can cost as little as for a summer weekday. So we have things divided by season and then divided by weekday, which is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and then weekend, which is Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So our sort of least expensive tier is a summer weekday. It's the hotter part of the year. We know plenty of folks are going to want to play golf in the Florida summer, but we try to keep the cost a little bit lower there. And that's $500 to join and $150 to play every year. So that's, pretty low barrier to entry for someone who really loves golf, really enjoys design, and wants to get into, and come out and visit us once a year, right? The second scenario is something more like, and this is something we see happening a lot. A lot of the memberships that have been purchased so far are sort of in this vein, where look, it's a guy's trip or a girl's trip or a family vacation or whatever, and you want to tack on a day or two at Old Charlie in addition to that. So in a scenario like that, let's say you have your regular foursome that wants to come out once a year and they want to play on a Saturday and a Sunday or something like that. That would be a total of 8 reservations. So you take whatever your initiation fee is for that particular day of week or that particular time of year, and then your annual dues are $150 per reservation. So something like that could be as little as $2,000, which is that summer weekday, 500 times 4 or so, and as expensive as around $4,000, a little bit over that. So, and that's for spring weekends. So it it's a lot of flexibility in the model. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And it gives you kind of that flexibility to say, well, look, I'm going to spend a little bit less money, but I'm going to come out in the summertime because the heat doesn't bother me or whatever else. And then I think the last example, and this is something that we're increasingly starting to see as people kind of get to understand the model a little bit better, is the reservations themselves are interchangeable as far as people go. So, we've got folks that are, it's a group of 10 or 12 guys or something like that. And they say, well, we may not make it out every year, but we at least want to buy some slots so that we can send some folks out. We're seeing men's golf associations do this. And we're seeing obviously buddy groups and things like that do this. So the idea there is, you buy your 4 reservations or your 8 reservations, you spread that cost across your group of 10, 12, 15 guys, whatever it is. and then you make your visit every other year or something like that. So those are sort of the primary ones we're seeing is folks joining that way. And again, we're designed in a way that we want to make that singular golf experience as consistently good as it possibly can be. So whether you're a single and you're going to come out one day a year, or you've got a foursome and you want to spend a whole week with us, it's going to be sort of the same type of experience every time.
That's pretty fascinating. I mean, not only the pricing I think is unique, but what you just mentioned around like the fungibility around who's actually using it. Like as you think of even like the destination models that you talked about, like a lot of that is member and 3 guests, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of ways if the member is not able to go, then the guests aren't able to go, and
Yeah.
the whole trip gets abandoned, or like the members actually probably subsidizing a big chunk of the cost in order to have the right to bring these guests, right? But what you're talking about is I think the ability to kind of pool resources and split this
Yeah.
up in an intelligent way that actually I think it makes it more we talked about the value prop, it makes it much more valuable and doable for folks to like I think just wrap their heads around it, because I think maybe one of the barriers to joining one of these clubs is like, yeah, I don't know if I can make it out there that often to justify the expense. Well, here, like you've lowered the expense and you've made the justification that much easier, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea. We wanted sort of the best aspect of a resort club, which is, look, it's a place where you're already going to go to vacation, and you're only going to pay for the time that you're there. Those are the two big benefits. But then we wanted to kind of get rid of some of the stuff that's a little bit more onerous about large resorts. You kind of get shuffled around. It's a fairly slow round in a lot of cases and all of that. So we wanted that piece to look a little bit more like a private club, a little bit more like you've got the run of the place, and it's someplace that you can call home, um, but less expense. And you're exactly right. I mean, the math is always hard to justify if you're looking at a place that you're not going to spend every day at, and you're looking at one of these initiation fees. If you kind of divide that up over the number of rounds, you're always going to be disappointed, right? But I don't think that most folks that join these clubs are doing that equation.
Yeah. Don't do it. Don't go there.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I did want to talk about like just the interest level. Like I actually don't know. Like I heard, like I said, I heard about it a couple months ago. Like how long you've been sort of quote unquote open for business, and just the inquiries that you're getting, the questions that you're getting, probably how many times you had to explain these membership parameters. Like what's been the nature and the reaction to kind of what you're doing for folks that have reached out to date?
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of positive momentum. We just started. I think you came across us probably 3 or 4 days after
Oh,
we
okay.
had sort of opened it up live. So you were very early. We started in May. So we're really, only, or I think late part of April is officially when the website went live. So we've only been at this for a month and a half or so. And we've gotten a significant amount of positive response so far. We've gotten plenty of members. We're up to about 50, I think, at this point, which is great. Good positive momentum, and I think that's going to continue as folks start to learn about this place from venues like this. So I appreciate you having me on to talk about it. It's great.
Well, this is yeah. I was maybe selfishly motivated to have you on. I just wanted to learn a little bit more, a little bit more about it, so I can maybe justify the explanation to my wife later this evening. So we'll see how we'll see how that conversation goes.
If you need me to talk to her, I can talk to her.
Yeah. So the other wrinkle around this is, I think, for the founding members, the guys that are joining early. Can you talk a little bit about the Goat Track Society?
Yeah. Our first tier of membership. You know, we kind of recognize that these folks are the folks that are putting a lot of faith in us very, very early on, and they're also the folks that are going to have to sort of wait the longest to get rewarded for that faith. If you're in early, then if we're opening in sometime in 2028, then you're going to have a little while to wait. So we wanted to make it really, really special for the folks that decided to sort of take that plunge with us. So a couple of different things that I think are really exciting. One is, it's not as if you just join and kind of sit on your hands for the next 2.5 years. We want to do plenty of stuff with the membership prior to opening our doors. Some of that's going to be outside of Old Charlie itself. We're gonna take a look at where the significant populations of our members are, and keep in mind, this is a place that's going to have thousands of members potentially. So we're going to have a decent concentration in different areas of the country. We'll do golf outings, meet and greets, things like that. Try to get Keith and Riley out on the road, or maybe to answer some questions and stuff like that. And then obviously, as we get closer to uh, opening day, we're going to have construction tours and preview play and all of that. And so our Go Track Society members are going to get first dibs on all of those things, first off, which is a really nice benefit. They're paying a little bit less initiation fee than the second tier and third tier memberships that we've got planned. So it's a little bit of a discounted approach. And then the other two things that I'm super excited about, particularly with the Goat Track Society. One is we're calling it Goat Track Challenges. We're a club that's not really set up as a private club to sort of have a traditional club championship or member guest or what have you. So what we wanted to do was have sort of a series of tournaments across the year that folks could come out and play and just get to know other members, have a great time, enjoy themselves. We're going to cover everything except for alcohol for these outings, and they're going to be a little bit different. It's going to be sort of a two-wave shotgun start. There'll be a competitive aspect of it. There may even be a final championship round at the end of the year. But the idea is that we want to give these folks some free golf and something a little bit different than what they're used to. And I'll be frank. Some of the tournament formats that you see at places like Sweets Cove or Goat Hill Park, or whatever, those are kind of the inspiration for some of this. They do some really interesting things and kind of theme it around, whether it's a sporting event or the Super Bowl or the Kentucky Derby or whatever it is. So we're going to kind of look at that and so that's a little bit of free golf that they'll get to enjoy every year. And then the other thing that I'm super stoked about and don't have a ton of details to share on this yet. Still sort of have to hammer these out with Keith and Riley, but we're gonna conduct a whole design contest with our members, which I'm super stoked about. This is something that when Keith and I first met, I'd talked to him a little bit about the Golf Digest Armchair Architect, and how when I was a kid, like 8, 9, 10 years old, I would do these pencil drawings on sort of lined notebook paper and send them into Golf Digest, thinking that I was going to get a golf hole built or whatever. And we talked about Riley, and of course Riley won the leader prize. I think it was 2012 or 14, I can't remember. But that is the design contest, right? It's based on Alistair McKenzie's principles. It's an anonymous submission, so nobody knows who the person that submitted the design is, and gets an awful lot of really top designers that contribute every year, and some really top designers that have won, and Riley just happens to be one of those. So this is sort of a little bit of an homage to him doing that, and just something that we thought would be a lot of fun. And we have this sort of unique opportunity where we're pre-construction. So once we have the routing in place, we can give folks, the topographic map and let them go to work and see what they do. And I think particularly for design aficionados, which is part of what this golf course is built for, that's something that is completely unique in sort of private golf anywhere that I've seen.
I was going to ask about it because it was the Lost Mackenzie hole, right? They had the par 3. I can picture the drawing in my head. Like, it was fantastic. Like, really one of the best Lido winners that I can recall in recent memory. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got the little golfer in the middle of it, kind of walking up the hill to there. Yeah. That's the one.
All right,
and
you just keep selling me. This is fantastic.
I think he sort of got some recognition for that as he was working for Renaissance, and then moved over to Core Crenshaw, partly as a result. I know it certainly propelled his career forward. So it's pretty awesome to be able to kind of see what folks can do with this. So we'll have more details soon. We don't completely have it hammered out as far as the timeline goes and all of that, but we'll be able to share those pretty soon.
All right. Well, one thing I did want to ask about just the vision for the course in terms of like walkability. Like, is it walking in carts? Like you see mostly cart play. Like obviously the routing decisions are going to be based on sort of where it's going to sit in that spectrum.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty good idea. Just really, I mean, the land is going to dictate the golf course, but the land is limited. You know, most of your private developments these days are starting with 400 acres, 500 acres, 1,000 acres, whatever it is, and saying, hey, go build a golf course in that. This is a little bit of a throwback where, you know, there was a limited acreage available. So you'll see elements of sort of more turn of the century and golden age type of golf courses where you've got tees really close to the greens. Um, you've got plenty of interplay between the holes. You can see other holes as you're going through, and again, that's not necessarily a design direction. It's just more that's what the land is giving us because we have a limited amount of land to work with. And then beyond that, I think you know the idea is to make it walkable for the folks that want to walk, but we're not going to be walking only by any means. If folks want to take a cart, they can. Really, the focus is on making sure that we're building things in a very, very sustainable way. So, as an example, you know, part of the problem with some of the golf courses that were built in the early 2000s were that they were built for these residential developments. So, the more distance that you had between a green and a tee, the better, because you could put houses in between there and all of that. And then they had just miles and miles and miles of concrete for cart paths and for other things and all of that. And you look and you play a lot of those courses these days, and that concrete is just completely destroyed. And so that's something that we want to try to avoid at all costs is anything that's going to require significant maintenance over time. You know, it's sort of it almost kind of harkens back a little bit to where Alistair McKenzie was trying to go. Ironically enough, when he was building Augusta National, which is a little bit more of a sustainable type of golf course. So I think that's going to dictate some of the design as well. Is just making sure that we're doing that. We're looking at things like, hey, maybe we do wall to wall zoysia grass as an example. So we just have one strain of grass rather than having, you know, a different strain of Bermuda on the greens as the fairways and that kind of thing. And hey, does that benefit us from a maintenance perspective? What can we do with new technology, with robot mowers and things like that? So if we've got robot mowers in the fairways or at the tees, then maybe we've got a lot more human finish work at the greens. So it's thinking about those kinds of things and also thinking about those things in context of the design. If that makes sense.
Yeah, this is really cool. I kudos to you for taking a fresh look at the landscape and just asking these questions. Like, is it possible for us to do things differently than it has been done? And I think with this vision of making the game more accessible, keeping expenses down, a lot of this I think is probably countercultural to what we've seen even in recent years in private golf here in the U.S. Right? They're trying to put walls up, and it seems like you're trying to tear those walls down. So I really respect you for that.
I appreciate it, and I don't think we're not anti-country club, right? There's a place for that, and I think we're all better off for those courses having been built. And I absolutely would not be able to even think about what I'm doing now without sort of Kaiser coming before and with all these designers getting this work at these private clubs and bringing up people like Keith and Riley that are now in heavy demand because of this work. So don't want to discount the private clubs out there in any way, shape, or form. We're just doing it a little bit differently, and we think that there's room for it. And you know, it does run counter to some of the typical country club things that you see. You know, we definitely wanted to be more laid back, so we're not talking about a dress code. You know, you can come out in your hoodie and your American flag shorts if you're Jason Day or whoever. and you know, we wanted to make it a little bit more laid back atmosphere around the clubhouse and all of that. But again, that's more in service to the type of experience that we want to build, not necessarily as sort of an antidote to the country club lifestyle necessarily.
No, I agree. I mean, I say this quite often that the game is big enough to accept all these different ways that
Yeah.
people play golf. You know, I think what you see maybe on Twitter and other spaces is folks get deeply rooted in sort of the way that they play golf, and it's kind of us
Mhm.
versus them versus like uh, walking versus carts, or push carts versus push cart mafia versus non push cart mafia, or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
guys that are there, they take the cart so they can have the beers in in the cart with the music blaring, and guys that are more like purists or whatever. The game is big enough for all of these things, right? So I think like finding a pocket where you're able to speak to a certain group of golfers that where it really resonates. Like Old Charlie is not trying to be all things for all people. It's just trying to find people
Absolutely
that
not.
that are drawn to this. And I think that's really the most successful clubs that kind of know who they are, know the golfer that they're trying to attract, and then those golfers sort of self-identifying once they find out. And then they're going to be your biggest advocates. They're going to be the biggest sellers of sort of like making sure the ethos of this club and the culture of the club carries on, through even future generations.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of it, right? I think you're absolutely right. There's room for all different kinds of approaches. I know that there are walking purists out there, and I highly respect them. I'm not one. Yeah, and mostly it's because I probably should be walking more than I do. But I think there's room for all of these. I know we're dealing with U.S. Open and all of that. Taking a look at like their maintenance practices and the fact that they want it to be U.S. Open conditions every single day of the year, and all of that. There's room for all of those kinds of things. And you're right. I mean, I think there's room for what we're doing as well. And you see a lot of sort of different approaches, everything from shorter golf courses to you've got more par threes. You've got places like the threes in Greenville that are opening up that are lighted par threes. So you've got sort of a much broader spectrum of possibilities now than you've had in quite some time in golf. And I'm really excited about a lot of it. I think there's potential for some additional developments in and around the area that we're going to be that will complement what we're doing and that are also sort of alternative takes on the game. So I'm here for it. I think there's plenty of room, and there's still plenty of room for the game to grow. And I think one of the easiest ways that you can do that is you take the folks that get into this casual environment. They go to a date night at a sim, or they go to Top Golf, or they go to Pop Stroke or something like that. And they're like, hey, I kind of like this. I might want to try it more. And traditionally, that's been difficult, right? That transition from sort of wearing jeans and a t-shirt and playing around and drinking a bunch of beer at Top Golf to going to a country club setting is incredibly intimidating, right? And you and I've been playing for years, so we don't feel it as much anymore. But I can tell you just from my wife, who's never been part of a sort of a country club scene, that's a little bit of an intimidating sort of transition. So I think you've got a lot of people that are sort of filling that gap between, and that's partly where we are. Partly it's to make it more accessible, and partly you're right. It's kind of a place that you come to every year, but you come to every year. You kind of make those memories, you make those lasting impressions. You get a chance to sort of figure out the nuance of the golf course, which I think Keith and Riley are going to be fantastic for. So it's a little bit of kind of the best of both worlds in that respect, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned timing a little bit, 2028. Like, are you waiting until you hit certain benchmarks in terms of membership, or is this full steam ahead? Like, where do you sit in terms of the golf course development?
Yeah, we have membership milestones and development milestones. So where we are right now, Keith and Riley are going to be coming out later this year to do the initial routing. By that time, the Goat Track Society membership will likely be closed. But that's sort of the next phase in the project. Then there's a lot of planning stuff that goes back and forth with the county and getting full approval for all that, and then we put shovels in the ground. So if everything goes swimmingly and all of that, then we're shooting for 2028, and but part of that is heavily reliant on two things that are somewhat out of our control. One is the speed of government. You never know how that's going to quite work out. And then the other is dealing with that in relation to Keith and Riley's schedule. As you mentioned, these guys are getting really, really busy. They're getting really, really popular, and that's the case across the world of architecture right now. So getting the right schedule in place is going to be key to sort of when we're able to open the doors. But I say that, I read an article the other day that said that the average wait list time for private clubs in the United States is 5 years. So you got less than that to get here, right?
Yeah. Well, one last question. Like, if somebody's listening to this and like, I'm in, like, I want to find out more. Can you talk a little about like where they would go and how they could reach out to you for more questions?
Yeah, we've got our website is oldcharliegolfclub.com. Pretty easy to remember. You can also get there from oldcharliegc.com. We've got both of those. And then we're on Instagram as well as oldcharliegc, Facebook. And then anybody, if they want to reach out, I'm Cliff at oldcharliegc.com.
Okay. Well, this is awesome. Thanks for spending time. I'm really interested to see how this develops. So, if you get it, I may come out like under construction if you'll have me. I love just like walking the ground and seeing these guys, pushing dirt around and pointing at things. And I have a ton of respect for both Keith and Riley. So those are great dudes. So I wish you all the luck, and maybe you might be getting a check from me pretty soon. So we'll see how it goes.
Great. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Cliff.
All right. Have a good day.
The Driven Golf Podcast is produced by Joseph K. If you like this episode, like it, subscribe, pass it on to a friend who might be interested. It really helps us out a lot. We'll be back in a couple weeks with the next episode. Until then, remember, in this great game, the journey is the gift. Enjoy the journey.